Actually, I'm glad I live in Bulgaria because it's nice and warm there at the moment. Okay, so this morning I'm going to talk about XCOM, the history, where it came from, maybe where it's going to. So it's going to be a bit of a history lesson today. I'll see if this clicker is working. What do I press? This one? Or that one? Interesting, we've got a technological problem already. Do I need to turn it on? Oh, it's those two, okay. Sorry, that's my fault. Okay, so the first XCOM game, some of you might be familiar with, I don't know. Put your hands up, raise your hands if you've actually played the original. Oh yeah, that's actually quite good. I'm surprised, I'm very surprised, because I'm sure this game is probably older than most of you. So the first XCOM was actually called UFO Enemy Unknown. We were working on this game, it was called UFO for quite a long while. And it was released in Europe as UFO Enemy Unknown on the PC, the Amiga CD32. CD32, by the way, was some strange console which mixed CD-ROM with the Amiga machine. But in North America, it was released as XCOM UFO Defense. And there was actually a PlayStation conversion made for it as well, which sold around 60,000 units. It was very difficult to play. And in those days, the development cost of games was actually very low. So I put here the total development cost of XCOM was £115,000. And it was a very small team. So it's myself and my brother who were doing all of the programming and the design. And we had a very small team based in Microprose in Chipping Sodbury, consisting of one artist who was doing the characters and another was doing the environment art. And then later on we had some involvement from sound guys, John Broomhall, who did the music, fantastic music for the game. But in those days, very small development, but it was a very long development because we started in 1991 and it wasn't released until 1994, just over 3 years of development time. So that's what XCOM was, but I want to go back a little bit more in history before that to, from my point of view, what were my influences in terms of game design. So we're going back now before home computers even existed. So back in 1978, 1979, 1980, these were the kinds of games that I was playing, and I took a lot of ideas from these games. They were fantastic, very complicated, difficult to play games. Sniper as a first person, as not first person, it's a individual level tactical simulation which had influence on many of my next games. And Squad Leader, of course, is still going today. Freedom in the Galaxy, fantastic game, which is basically a Star Wars simulator because you had action on the individual character level and you had action at the Empire Galactic level. And Traveller was actually a science fiction RPG, which also had a lot of influence on my development of XCOM. So these are the games I was playing, and when I got my first computer, which was a ZX Spectrum, these are the games that I started making. So here on the left, you've got Rebel Star Raiders, released in 1984. It's a two-player only game. All the action took place on one screen, released only on the ZX Spectrum. And you have to bear in mind that in those days, you know, the entire code and data of a ZX Spectrum, 41K thereabouts, less than an icon on your Windows desktop today. Amazing. And even then, you had individual characters with individual weapons. You can see them there, tiny little 8x8 pixels, entire 9 bytes to render one of those characters, if you could imagine that. And then later, I developed a little bit more, Rebel Star 1 and 2. So here, we had a scrolling map. We also had an AI. The AI was programmed in probably around 3K of code, programmed in assembly language, which in those days was very time-consuming to program in. But even there, you see some of the origins of the elements of design in the modern XCOM are in there. You still got the morale effects in there. And then in Laser Squad in 1988, a much more ambitious game, here you had multiple scenarios. You had terrain distraction. You had hidden line of sight. You had equipping of your characters. Your characters were much more sophisticated. You could equip them with armor and different weapons. You could throw grenades. You could prime grenades. You could hide grenades in plant pots. What else did it have? Oh, yeah, you've got morale and stamina. See down the right, this is to read out your character. Again, the characters were all individually named and everything. So, and there was a sequence of scenarios in this. I think we had about 5 levels in the whole game. And these games are basically the origin of the modern XCOM. So after I developed those in 1991, together with my brother, we were looking to do a new project. At that stage, we had a demo, which we called Laser Squad 2, and this was on the Atari ST. And we wanted to find the best publisher for the game that we could, and we wanted to develop it on the PC. And the big influence on us at the time was, of course, Microprose. And they had released Railroad Tycoon, I can't remember when, 1990. Civilization, I think it had just come out in 1991. And from my point of view, and my brother's point of view, Sid Meier was literally the best in the world. He was the main man, the guru. And Microprose, for us, were the best company. So they were top of our list, and we approached Microprose with our little demo of Laser Squad 2. So, how did Laser Squad 2 turn into XCOM? It's an interesting story because we took the demo to Microprose in Chipping Sodbury in the UK, and they looked at it, they thought about it, and they came back to us, and they said that they wanted to make it a big game. They wanted something that could compete on some level with Civilization. The reason being that Microprose in the UK was like the ginger stepchild of the Microprose family, and they really wanted to prove that Microprose UK could do something as good as what Sid Meier could do, basically. So they gave us 3 requirements. So the first one, when it's set on Earth. Second one, that it should have a research system and an equivalent of the Civilopedia that appeared in Civilization, which became the UFOpedia. And the third one was the theme was based around UFOs. In fact, they were mostly influenced by Jerry Anderson's TV series UFO, which maybe some of you know about, I don't know. So those 3 things, and you can see how they were thinking that, yeah, we want something which is going to compete with Civilization. And as far as I was concerned, I was really up for it. I thought this was fantastic. Let's go for it. So I did my research. So obviously, looking at Jerry Anderson's UFO series, they had the elements there already of interceptions, because in that TV series, the UFOs came in from outer space. You had interceptors based on the moon, came into the Earth's atmosphere, interceptors based in the sky, and sometimes the UFOs managed to reach the ground, and then they had to try and they had interceptors on the ground, which had to try and find the UFOs. So that concept made it into XCOM, and Shadow, the organization in the TV series, essentially became like XCOM in the game. However, I thought the aliens in UFO were very boring, so I looked at this particular book, Alien Liaison, was a very big influence on the game as well. And here we had this guy called Bob Lazar who claimed that he worked at Area 51 working on reverse engineering real UFOs. And he claimed they were powered by this element 115, element 115, which in the game, you probably know, became Illyrium, as I named it. So also there was stuff about cattle mutilations in there, alien abductions, all that stuff made it into the game. As an interesting side note, by the way, element 115 has actually been produced and discovered. It's now called Unum Pentium. I can't use it for anything because it exists for a tiny fraction of a second before it decays into whatever. So these were the origins of the creation of the game itself. As for the name, XCOM, so the name wasn't invented by me. It was invented by 2 designers at Microprose UK, Stephen Hand, Mike Brunton. It's a very tortured acronym, I'm afraid, because it's supposed to stand for Extraterrestrial Combat Force. And that was the original logo of the game there. So in the game itself, of course, we had these two parts, Geoscape and Battlescape. And the tactical proportion was very much based on our work on Laser Squad 2. It had additionally a lighting system, which we could get from the PC technology. So it looks very primitive by today's standards. I really wanted this sense that the aliens were coming at you out of the darkness. And often in the game, as you probably know for players who've played it, you would hear the aliens before you see them. And often you would die before you see them as well. That's another point. But often they were coming at you out of the darkness, shooting at you out of the darkness. And it was a game that had a lot of suspense in it because you didn't know what was around the next corner. It had distractable terrain, fire, smoke, gas. The fire will spread, it will destroy the terrain, burn it down, and so on. And you had an equipping system and everything there. So, but the Geoscape is really the new bit which I added. I proposed this idea to Microprose very early on. And Nick, my brother, programmed this fantastically. It's a 3D rendered, rotating, spinny globe. Very advanced technology for its time. But these two parts of the game were actually two separate programs, believe it or not, because in those days the PC was a very underpowered machine. And we had very limited memory for actually putting the whole game in. So what happened here was that the Geoscape would load up the Battlescape, and when that was done, the Battlescape would load up the Geoscape, and it would exchange data between the two programs just by saving it to disk and loading it from the disk. That's how it worked. Technically, we had some very big problems because in those days, the PC programming, basically, PC had 640K of memory. Then later, there were two independent systems that were developed to extend that memory beyond the 640K. There was something called extended memory, something called expanded memory, and it was just a nightmare to get PC games to run. I remember playing the original SimCity on the PC, and it was ridiculous trying to get that to work. But then along came something called Whatcom-C, the Whatcom-C compiler, which gave you a flat memory model, which allowed programmers to just address that addressable space as if it was just a single contiguous memory space. And actually, I would say that the Whatcom-C compiler did more for PC gaming than probably anything in those days. And it made our job a lot easier. So, after we did the first XCOM, of course, there were sequels. And XCOM Terror from the Deep wasn't done by myself and Nick. Microprose wanted us to do a sequel in 6 months. We said, no, this was not possible. We wanted to do something more ambitious. And they said, well, OK, we'll do this sequel in-house at Microprose UK, and you can work on the third in this series, which was going to become XCOM Apocalypse. In the event, it took them more than a year to do Terror from the Deep, and it was basically the same as the first one. In terms of the engine, gameplay is much the same. They basically reskinned it, put some new aliens, new data in there. It was much more difficult, and for those of you who've played the game, this problem of finding the last alien on the map, has anyone experienced that problem? Yeah. Very annoying. Even worse on Terror from the Deep. The reason why the aliens run away, by the way, is they also suffer from morale effects. And if he's down to one little alien, of course, he's going to run away and hide. Logical. Not very good fun, unfortunately. Now, with XCOM Apocalypse, it was really a radical move on the design of the game because we built it for a real-time system rather than turn-based. Though in actual fact, in the tactical combats in Apocalypse, you could play them turn-based or real-time. You could choose every time you go into a combat. We really designed it from the point of view of making a real-time system. Now, in those days, the craze was RTS games. So if you've played any RTS games, they sort of all originate from the mid-1990s. And I remember going to a game developers conference in San Jose. There was somebody was giving a lecture on pathfinding. You go into this lecture on pathfinding, there's like literally hundreds of people there trying to figure out how to program pathfinding for their RTS game, because everybody was making RTS games. And you know, RTS was like a mainstream PC games genre in those days. It's not anymore. But our implementation of a real-time system for the combat, of course, doesn't have much in common with other RTS games. And it was a very sophisticated game, very troubled development. I put here a question: was it a concession to the RTS deluge of games that happened at that time? Maybe it was. I think it was probably a mistake. Even though Apocalypse was a successful game financially, critically speaking, I personally didn't think it worked as well as the first one. Now I've got what comes next is what I call the Heretical X-COMS. Because they basically diverged too far from the original, if you like, formula of XCOM, and they suffered because of it. So in 1998, got XCOM Interceptor. It had a research system in it, a sort of strategic part, but the tactical part was replaced by a sort of substandard Wing Commander style game. Not saying it's a bad game in its own right, but it wasn't very successful. I think it sold around 30,000 copies, very small. You had XCOM Enforcer, which came out in 2001. That took assets from another game called XCOM Alliance, which we'll talk about in a minute. And this was basically an FPS. It had nothing to do with the original XCOM, really. I will probably put the Bureau XCOM Declassified into the heretical group of XCOMs. And, you know, in my view, these games, well, the first two at least, really sort of killed off the XCOM brand. The whole meaning and genre that was created with the first game was basically lost. But interestingly, there were a couple of cancelled XCOMs, which you may have heard about. The first one, XCOM Alliance. Now, this was actually the original heresy, because they decided to do this game in 1995, started work on it in 1996 in Microprose UK shipping Sudbury. And it was using the Unreal Engine at the time, and it was sort of a squad-based shooter. It's not clear exactly how it worked, but basically you had 4 guys. You control one of them real time, and you can give orders to your other 3 guys. And you got, you can see in the screenshot up here, you got 4 different camera views for each of your soldiers. What use that had, I'm not entirely sure. That was developed in Microprose UK. Then when Microprose UK was shut down, the development was transferred to the US. And I remember going to the E3 exhibition in 1999, and I actually saw them displaying XCOM Alliance. In fact, it was a very, very big display. They had little robots going around with guns, dressed up like that. Not robots, little dwarves, actually. They had these huge cylinders filled with alien fetuses or whatever it was, I don't know. And they had a whole bank of computers displaying a game. And I went up to have a look at it. And one of the guys from Microprose came over and says, "Oh, are you familiar with XCOM?" And I said, a little bit, you know, just remind me. So he says, "Well, with XCOM Alliance, we really went back to what our players really wanted from an XCOM game. We got all this research, we got all these weapons." And I was looking, I thought, well, hold on, but where's the turn-based tactical combat gone? And I actually played it for a bit, and it clearly had a lot of bugs in it, a lot of problems. My character started leaning back like this, and he wouldn't stand up straight. And this project was eventually cancelled. It's actually cancelled by Infogram, actually, after it was transferred from Hasbro. But they spent a huge amount of money and a lot of time on it. And that was supposed to be their flagship XCOM product. It was a heretical XCOM, so I guess I'm glad it didn't come out at all. But then in Hunt Valley, they started to develop XCOM Genesis. And this was intended to be much closer to the original XCOM. It did have portable real-time combat, like in XCOM Apocalypse, but the whole approach was, again, to try and recreate that original XCOM feeling. That was in development from middle of 1999 to December 99, and then it was shut down by Hasbro. Hasbro are not my favorite company in the world, but they shut a lot of games down here. XCOM Genesis was actually designed by Dave Ellis, who worked on the original strategy guides for XCOM. So, one of the interesting things that happened early on in development of XCOM was that there was essentially an ambiguity legally as to who owned the rights. Was it my company, at the time Mythos Games, or was it Microprose? And clearly Microprose thought there was a serious problem with the rights. I mean, our lawyers were saying that the ownership was ambiguous. And we actually negotiated to transfer the rights completely to Microprose in return for a higher royalty on XCOM Apocalypse, which we were developing at the time. So I lost all IP rights to XCOM, which is a bit of a mistake because what we gave away was probably too much. But as you see, what Microprose did with the XCOM brand was ultimately they didn't manage to do very much with it either. So, after that, I did actually try a number of times to try and remake the original XCOM in different ways. Obviously, I couldn't call it XCOM anymore. I couldn't use the same story, but I can go back to what I thought was the original gameplay ideas. Dreamland Chronicles, although it was a cancelled project, we worked on this for just over a year. It was developed for the PC and PS2, and we wanted a bit more of a console flavor to the game, so it had third-person control of movement of a character. You selected your character, you moved him around with the controller. As you moved him, your little action point bar diminished. And when you wanted to shoot something, you went into a first-person mode, which you can see there. And you moved the controller around to point at what you wanted to shoot at. So it was completely turn-based, but the presentation and control was somewhat different. It also had fully destructible terrain, and it was going to have randomly generated, procedurally generated tactical levels as well. It had a Geoscape functioning as well. We didn't get so far with it because our publisher at the time, which was Virgin Interactive, they got bought by Interplay and then Titus Interactive. Virgin Interactive went bust, basically. However, the interesting thing is, if you played Valkyria Chronicles, has anybody played this game? Not many, okay. So the way Valkyria Chronicles worked was actually very similar to the way Dreamland worked, and the way you controlled your characters, the way you did the shooting, the way you had a sort of overhead command mode. And interesting game. If you haven't played it, by the way, you can get it on Steam. I recommend it. It's not very expensive. So unfortunately, Dreamland Chronicles was also shut down. So what happened was that after we had to liquidate our company because we had a 4-game contract with Virgin Interactive. We'd done 1 game for them, which was Magic and Mayhem. Dreamland Chronicles was supposed to be the 2nd game. But because we had a 4-game contract, we couldn't go to another publisher. So we had to liquidate our development company, Mythos Games, at the time. And they took all the assets for Dreamland, and they gave it to another company called Alta Interactive, who then made the UFO Aftermath series, which some of you may have played, I don't know. So they actually changed completely our story. They changed the tactical system. Again, it had a sort of real-time tactical system, which wasn't very good actually. But nonetheless, they produced 3 titles which were inspired by the original XCOM. From my point of view, then I went on to develop something called Laser Squad Nemesis, which again is a different take on the tactical game system. This had a phased real-time system, So you actually gave instructions for your next 10 seconds of gameplay. And your opponent was doing the same. And then the turns were processed by a central server. You got the result back. And you could review it in video-style controls. This was a brilliant game. I'm really proud of this one. Not many people played it. It was an online-only game. And you exchange the turns via email. So you send your turns to the server by email, and you got them back by email. We tried to expand this system with LSN Earth. We actually did a pitch to Electronic Arts, and we said, look, we want to take Laser Squad, we want to make it into a bigger game with this Earth system and this whole Geoscape thing, and actually make it something more like the original XCOM, but that never happened. However, Laser Squad Nemesis did inspire another game called Frozen Synapse, which you may have heard of. Them like more popular than Laser Squad, but basically Frozen Synapse is, the game system is based very closely on Laser Squad Nemesis. After that, I had an opportunity to do an XCOM style game for Namco. They wanted to set up a studio in England, and we proposed them to do an XCOM style game for PC. We went over to the US to do a pitch, and for whatever reason they turned it down. But they did have an opening for a GBA game, and I did Rebel Star Tactical Command. Now this game, I think I'm going backwards in my career here because I'm going to the tiniest machine possible. It's like working on a Spectrum again. But Rebel Star Tactical Command was, again, it was a turn-based game with very much all the elements of the tactical battles that you find in XCOM. Then after that, I moved to Bulgaria. I started working for Ubisoft. I did a whole bunch of projects there which were cancelled. Getting a bit tired of that, I decided to do a pitch for a new project. Our studio at the time was only working on DS games. So I did this pitch, which was Ghost Recon meets XCOM for the DS. That was basically the pitch. And they went for it. So Ubisoft greenlit this project. And originally, the design of it was actually very similar again to the original XCOM. You had a sort of Geoscape view, you had mission generators, you had turn-based tactical missions. And in fact, the original prototype of Ghost Recon Shadow Wars used the 2 action point system that you find in the modern Firaxis XCOM. And I suspect that we got this system from the same source, which was a board game called Descent, which used this 2 action point system very effectively. And our prototype for Ghost Recon Shadow Wars used this very effectively as well. But when we went for the what's called the kickoff meeting with Ubisoft in Paris, and we showed this fantastic game with Geoscape, 3D tactical battles, destructible terrain, and everything. The feedback that they gave us was, no, you can't possibly do this on the DS. This is far too much like a PC game. And I thought, well, you know, that was the original pitch I was put there. So we had to go back and redesign the game. The Geoscape was taken out. The control system was made to be much more like Advanced Wars, but nonetheless, we had a tactical turn-based strategy game, Ghost Recon Shadow Wars, which was a launch title on the 3DS. So I'm still not satisfied with my attempts to redo XCOM. There were, however, a number of independent developers who were working on XCOM-like games. The UFO Extraterrestrials, slightly uninspiring game. It was okay. They apparently got a sequel coming out. Aliens vs. Humans Onslaught is actually an iOS Android game and is an attempt to pretty much copy exactly the original XCOM. It's okay, not brilliant. Xenonauts, however, I think is really probably the only game since the original XCOM that has really tried to recreate, I guess, the gameplay of the original XCOM. And they spent about 5 years working on this. And the setting is a little bit different. It's set historically rather than in the future, but I would recommend it if you haven't played it. It's worth a try. There are also some interesting mods. So, and open source ones. UFO 2000 was multiplayer only. UFO Alien Invasion is an open source attempt at XCOM. Open XCOM, though, is a mod. If you've got the original XCOM, you can install this mod, and it basically gives a much better interface. Basically, reprogram the original game. So if you've got the original XCOM, I recommend that one. You need to go to openxcom.org. Now we come to the modern XCOM, and this is where everything changes. So, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, of course, the XCOM brand has been reinvigorated, reborn again, fantastically by Firaxis. Given it was Sid Meier inspired me originally to go to Microprose, I guess it's probably quite fitting that Firaxis, Sid Meier's company, should develop this. And probably XCOM Enemy Unknown has probably done more for turn-based strategy gaming than any game in history. I don't know what the sales figures are, but it's done over 3 million on PC, almost 1 million on consoles, so it's maybe not so big by AAA game standards, but it's very good for a turn-based strategy game. What they did really well here was the sheer drama and excitement of the game transformed what could be a very dull turn-based affair into something which much more dramatic, visual and cinematic. A great character progression system, exciting tactical battles, an interesting line of sight system. Not perfect, but I thought it was quite an interesting approach. Some things obviously were missing from this game compared to the original XCOM. The Geoscape, I thought it was a bit of a, well, it didn't really exist, I guess. And the base building, base missions, again, were very downplayed. But it did give you a lot of really tense moments in the game at every stage, and I think they did a very good job of that. The terror mission, interestingly, some of the terror missions were the ones which kind of annoy me a bit, because you're given a choice of 3 missions to do, you've got to choose one of them. To me, it slightly destroyed the immersion of the game. So, whereas the tactical battles were really immersive, I thought that the if you like, the strategic part was less immersive and somehow undermined it a little bit. And of course, when you actually got to the tactical battles, this pod activation system, which also exists in XCOM 2, is kind of once you understood how it worked, then you could do very well at the game. But it's a little bit bizarre still. It wasn't quite how I implemented the original XCOM. And overall, it was kind of a bit more of a structured, guided experience than the original XCOM. So the original XCOM, the aliens had their own agenda, they had their own plans, they developed them completely regardless of what you did as the player, and you could only interfere in what the aliens were doing. In the Firaxis XCOM, certain stages in the game were simply driven by certain events that you did, basically. So again, that I think slightly undermined the immersion a little bit. And we lost a little bit of the sense of the terror in the dark from the original XCOM as well. So Enemy Within, I think this was actually a really good sequel, by the way. Very good. It's kind of a DLC, but the mechs were great. I felt really sorry about chopping the arms and legs off my soldiers, but it was kind of, again, it gave you that emotional involvement in your soldiers, which was quite interesting. But I think the Long War mod was very interesting, because with the Long War mod, I think they tried to, well, actually, I'm never really sure what they tried to do with it, but they certainly succeeded with it, because it's a very good, much more better paced game, actually, than the original, if you haven't already tried it. Anyway, so we just get up to XCOM 2. So I've been playing this game a lot in the last month. Has anybody played it? Anybody completed it? Oh, wow, well done. Must confess that I haven't completed it quite yet. I'm on the last mission. I've been playing at veteran level, but I put a lot of hours into it so far. So I think this is brilliant, a brilliant but flawed game, and it's just got fantastic drama in it. And then again, the action cam stuff where you're doing the your Overwatch opportunity fire is fantastic. Absolutely brilliant sound design, really, really amazing. And actually the class design, I put a lot of thought into the class design, the 5 classes that you get. You got some really interesting choices there. I really appreciated that. Interesting abilities, very annoying in many cases, but very, very cool. And the Geoscape, again, the most problematic bit of the design of any XCOM game in some ways. They've got something which is certainly more involving and got more gameplay involved in it in the Geoscape. This conceal mode, again, it's a new addition to the game. I'm kind of in two minds about it. I think it's pretty cool, especially when you're setting up an ambush. That first ambush that you do can be really cool. But most of all, I think what they've done, which does go back very much to the feel of the original XCOMs, they've got a mission generator which has procedurally generated tactical levels. And I think they've done an absolutely amazing job with that. It's very sophisticated. You've got destructible terrain, which I discovered to my cost. It's not a good idea to put a little row of guys on a building in front of a muton. Not a good idea. They all got grenaded and they fell down and they hurt themselves even more. What a shame. And obviously the modding support is great. They got rid of the interceptions altogether, which is probably a good thing. So all these things are really good. And but it's actually a very controversial game design, as you probably maybe read quite all the comments about it. It's really quite an overwhelming game when you start playing it. Even on the strategic side, you get all these things, and you got like this, black site facilities appeared in red, and you start to panic and think, well, my God, I've got to take this out. What do I do about it? Go and attack it. Oh, I lost all my guys. And actually, you have to learn not to do what they tell you to do most of the time in the game. That's why it says it's got a slight false sense of urgency in the game. They're just trying to warn you should be doing this, this, and this, but actually you can actually relax a bit in the game. You can actually let those pips get all the way up on the avatar progression, and you can push them all the way down again. So, the panic is not really justified. They've still got this strange triple choice mechanic in for the equivalent of the Terror missions. This time it's a little bit more interesting because you've got to choose what reward you get as well as what, dark event happens. But again, you're just given one choice. The other two are probably going to happen. The base building, I don't know. I find that probably the most curious part of the whole game. So they've obviously tried to improve that with this little sort of placement where you have to place your engineers around the place. I couldn't figure out what to do with my scientists, though, because I think I got like 5 scientists. I hadn't even built a laboratory. Did I need to build a laboratory? I don't know. Actually, I built a laboratory at very late stages of the game. Put a couple of scientists in it. Didn't have any problems researching everything. But this pod activation remains. It's got some interesting nuances in it, though, because of the new abilities of your soldiers. Some stuff which I really appreciate was like putting my ranger back into concealment mode, arming him with the what's it called? The bomb which is activated by motion. Throwing it onto a what? The what? No, it's the proximity mine. Sorry, yeah. It's kind of yeah, so you throw a proximity mine on a static group of aliens, then you just walk away and you try and find another pod and you attack them. And then as soon as that static group start moving, they blow themselves up. That was very cool. Lots of really cool moments in the game. And the turn timers, which are used very frequently in a game, are also a very controversial design decision. I can see why they did it, particularly because the strategy that most players evolved in the previous game was this creeping forwards, activating one alien pod at a time. And this still seems to be more or less the right strategy to do in the new game as well, at least from my point of view. I was actually doing very well with Grenadiers in the early stage of the game. I got a whole string of absolute perfect mission scores. It's very, very curious balancing of the game, but what they've got is actually a much more sophisticated game than previously. And I think it's got a very interesting future, especially because of the modding. I think this is a really fantastic game, and well done to Firaxis for this. So, oh, this is not working anymore. Oh, okay, come on. No? Aha, okay, Chaos Reborn. So this is my latest game, released last year. Here it is, Chaos Reborn. Turn-based tactical game. If you haven't tried it, you can download a free demo from Steam. It gives you access to most of the multiplayer stuff and some of the single-player. And here I was remaking a game that I made 30 years before. And one of the interesting issues that I had to deal with, which XCOM also has to deal with, is this whole question of the random number generator. And there are a significant number of players who have real problems with random numbers. And for Chaos Reborn, we had this a lot last year. So you get players typically saying, I had 5 spells in a row failed at 80%, and the AI gets everything. And you get these comments endlessly. And it does turn out that, psychologically speaking, that something called negativity bias is actually a very strong psychological trait in some people. And you will always tend to see the bad things that happen to you, and when the good things happen to you, well, you deserved it somehow, The other problem, which we picked up on with Chaos Reborn, is that in true random number generators, you tend to get far more sequences of similar results than people imagine there should be. So yes, you do get 5 fails at 80% in a row is possible with a random number generator, but people seem to think this should not happen at all. So there are big problems with random numbers, and Chaos Reborn and XCOM are both very explicit in how they show the random numbers. In the case of XCOM, of course, it's your firing percentage, your chance to hit, explicitly shown and calculated, and Chaos Reborn, random number generators all over the place. So it is very problematic, and in the recent interview in Gama Sutra that Jake Solomon did, he actually admitted that they cheated the random numbers in XCOM 2 because of this psychological problem. Interesting point, but there you go. However, if I can make this work again, okay. Okay, so what future for the XCOM genre? So I think one thing that Firaxis XCOM has done amazingly is that it has made turn-based strategy games a real thing again. And they practically died out many years ago. But I think there's a good future. There's already some XCOM-style games coming out. For my next project, if you want to learn a little bit about it, you can go to this website, phoenixpoint.info, and I can reveal to you for the first time ever that this will in fact be an XCOM-style game in gameplay. It will have tactical turn-based missions. It will have a geoscape. It will have destructible terrain. It will have character progression, and so on. If you want to learn more about it, you can sign up for our newsletter, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and so on. But please have a look at the website. And finally, thank you for listening. And if we've got some time, I can take some questions. Just check how much time we've got left, actually. Okay, you've got about 15 minutes for questions. Anybody? Sorry, yes. Two questions.
Pick a question.
Somebody put his hand up here. Sorry, I was a bit long, wasn't I?
Hello. First of all, thanks for making XCOM. Love the games. May I ask, have you played the board game, and do you enjoy it? Do you think it lives up to the same sort of frantic, mind-boggling, decision-making that the series has?
Bit early to say. I've played the board game once only. I need to play it some more really to get an opinion on it. But it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's quite cool. I agree. One more
Thank
question.
you.
One more.
Back.
Hello. You talked about the game earlier that sounded really good on the DS. It was the Ghost Recon.
Ghost Recon Shadow Wars, yeah.
Yeah, and then you said that you had to take out all these really awesome sounding bits to keep these other dudes happy. But like, do you have any of the original code like lying around somewhere that you could release? As freeware.
No.
Just for, okay.
No, I don't. By that stage, we'd only produced a demo, so it wasn't exactly a full working version of the game. We produced a demo of the tactical battles, which we showed at this kickoff meeting, but that was it.
Thank you very much. It was an honor having the opportunity to talk to you. Oh my God, it's Julian Gollop, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.